Hi, this is Rabbi Tzvi Mandel of Kalbnei Israel, community of Jewish friends, and again, it's great to speak to you guys. And we'll discuss a couple of beautiful ideas about tzaddikim, the Halakha Rebbes, the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, the students of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. So the great Reb Nachman Haradanka was already an elderly man, but he would still spend hours and hours every week when he wasn't learning, going from door to door, collecting for the hundreds of different charities, poor people, scholars, Talmidei Chacham, widows, orphans, collars, all kinds of things. And it was on a very, very cold night in those areas in Russia when he walked up to the home of a very rich man and slipped and fell down. And here he was an elderly man, couldn't pick himself up again. Started screaming, and a wagon driver passed by and said, "Rebbe, what happened? Please come." And took him on his coach. And after he drove him a little while, the Halakha Reb Nachman said, "Okay, leave me off over here." And he says, "Rebbe, but I wanted to bring you home. You're freezing cold, you fell, and how are you going to get home anyway? I mean, you're not a young man." And the Reb Nachman tells him, No, leave me here. I have to go continue collecting for my people." He says, but how? You don't have the strength. So he says, "I want to ask you something. What in case right now someone will give you a great business deal and you have to go through the wilderness, but you'll make a lot of money. Would you do it?" So he says, "Of course I would. I have to support my wife and children." So he says, "Well, I also have to support more than the 6 children that you have. I'm supporting hundreds of people. And I have a big, big salary waiting for me if I do it." Next story is a story about a very poor tailor who was barely making any money to support his family, and his business was down to fixing old clothes because people didn't even trust him with new or better clothes, and he had to figure out a way how this could work. So he thought of a great idea. There was another tailor in his city that also wasn't making much. And so they decided that they'll go together from city to city and village to village, and they'll come home for Shabbos. And perhaps out of town, you change your mazel, they say. So there's a bracha sometimes. And they davened and prayed, and they went from town to town and city to city and came home for Shabbos. They were doing this for some time. One day they go to one of their cities, and the innkeeper where they would stay looked very down. And they asked him, "What's bothering you? You're usually in a jolly mood." And he says, "I'll tell you what happened. I haven't had a lot of business this month. And worse than that, the landowner, the Paritz, is marrying off his daughter. And somehow he gave me the job to find 2 tailors to mend the wedding gown for the Kala and for the bride and for his wife and for his other children, because this wedding is going to be a great, a royal wedding. The Paritz is marrying off his daughter. And all the tailors that I've ever given him, he didn't like. They weren't good enough for him. So these 2 tailors said, "Well, you have the 2 tailors. Why don't you recommend us to him?" And he said, "Oh, please, you guys, you're paupers. You just come here to make a couple of pennies." They said, "Look, it can't hurt. If he refused the others, he can refuse us. But maybe he won't. Maybe it'll be good." He said, "Okay, take a positive approach." And so he goes to the mansion, and introduces them to the pirates, to the landowner, and the landowner first gives them some work to do for his servants, and he says, "I give you a week's time and make some beautiful clothes for these 5 servants of mine." And they did it in less than a week's time, and they were very successful. It was beautiful, and he was very happy about it. So he says, "You know what? I'm giving you guys the job. You guys have the job of making the wedding gown for the bride and for the mother of the bride and the sisters, and you'll make clothes for me also and other respectable people, because I see that you guys really have a good way of tailoring clothes." And a couple of months they stayed there and they did top job. And he paid them both a lot of money. As they were ready to leave, and he gives them the cash, the wife of the pirates, the wife of the landowner, says, "You know what, Yvonne? Why don't you tell these Jews about the guy and his family that are rotting in the jail down in the cellar, who haven't eaten for who knows how long? Maybe they'll want to pay the 300 rubles that they owe." And he turns to them and says, "Well, what do you guys think about it?" So right away, this one tailor said, "I'll be more than happy to do it. Do you want to join? So it'll be 150, 150. And the guy says, "Look, I have to support my family." He says, "Well, if you don't want to, I'll have the merit of doing the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvoyim, of releasing poor people that are in jail for no reason whatsoever. And I'll get the Gan Eden for it. I'll get my place in paradise for it." And right away he takes the 300, which was the whole salary that he made for the last number of months, and gives it to the parts. And the wife says, "Wow, you Jews are something special. Look at this. To save your only brother, your own brother, all the money that you worked so hard for these last number of months, let him out with his family, and for the next year we're not going to charge him rent, just because the Jews are so special." Okay, they go back to the cities where they live. And now the tailor that doesn't have any money doesn't have a job either, and he doesn't know what to do, because the little money that he was making before, now he has to get some new customers again, while the other guy started a nice big business and it was very successful. So after he saw it's not going his way too well, he decided that he'll go next to the shul and collect money like all the other paupers. And that's what he did. One day, one of the businessmen passed by, and his mind was somewhere else. He has a big business deal the next day, and he's trying to figure out how to do it, and what monies he's going to take out of where and put in where, and blah, blah, blah. And this poor guy says, "Please, can you give me some money?" And like the guy's out of a trance, and he says, "I'll give you some money, but what are you going to give me for the money?" And right away he says, "I'll give you a blessing." So he smirks, he says, "Okay, here, I'm giving you a couple of rubles." And he blesses him. "You should be very successful in your business, and you should have all kinds of nachas." And the guy walks away. And sure enough, he had to do this big business deal with a very big, stubborn guy that usually it was very hard for him to deal with him. And this time he was very successful. So he decided that next time he does a big business deal, he's going to ask this guy also. And it happened again. He gave him a nice warm blessing, and he was smiling to him, and he said, "Don't worry, you'll be unbelievably successful." And it happened. And so every time he had to do a big deal, he went to this pauper and gave him a nice donation and received a beautiful blessing, and it actually was Mekoyim. It actually happened exactly the way he blessed him. He was very successful. Well, one day, he was sitting with his friends, other big businessmen, and they were drinking and eating, and he was a little, tipsy, and he says, I got to tell you about this pauper that gives blessings. And from then on, all the other people also went for brachas, for blessings, and they were all successful in business. Well, at one point, two of the students of the Baal Shem Tov happened to have been in that city, and they heard about this guy. So when they went back to the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, Baal Shem Tov said, please tell this man that I'd love to meet him, and try to get him to come to me. Well, they went to him, and he was more than happy to say, sure, I'll go see. The holy Baal Shem Tov wants to see me. Of course I'll go speak to him. Comes to the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and the Baal Shem Tov says to him, tell me your life's history. And he told him about how he was a poor tailor, and then he joined this other tailor, and they used to go from city to city and town to town. They were very successful, and the story with saving that family. And after he saved that family, all of a sudden, all his blessings became an actuality, whoever he blessed. So the Holy Baal Shem Tov told him, I want you to know that the reason why you were so successful was because sometimes a person does a great, great mitzvah. And as a reward for the mitzvah, not only in the next world, but also in this world, he gets a spiritual reward. It raises his status, it raises his neshama. And that's what